When you hear the name Joseph Stalin, you probably picture an iron-fisted dictator. But what was really going on inside his head when it came to foreign policy? I mean, was he a true believer, dead set on spreading communism around the world? Or was he something else entirely, something much more practical? Okay, let's get into it. This right here is the big question. It's this constant tug of war between two massive motivations, ideology versus raw national self-interest. Figuring out which one truly drove him is the key, really, because it changes how we see the biggest conflicts of the 20th century, from the rise of fascism all the way to the start of the Cold War. As we go through this, we're going to see him face this choice again and again and again. So to really get Stalin's decisions, you first have to understand the ideological civil war that was raging inside the Communist Party. On one side, you got Trotsky and his idea of permanent revolution, the classic Marxist playbook of spreading communism everywhere right now. But Stalin, he championed something totally different, socialism in one country. His whole argument was, hey, look, the USSR is weak, we're surrounded by enemies, and we need to build ourselves up first before we can even dream about exporting the revolution. So in those early years, right after Lenin's death, from about 1924 to 1928, Stalin put that theory of his into practice. And his entire foreign policy, it was all driven by one single overwhelming need back home. And this quote, wow, you can almost feel the absolute terror behind these words. This wasn't just some 5-year plan. For him, it was a life-or-death situation. Stalin was convinced, absolutely convinced, that the capitalist powers were going to invade and just wipe the Soviet experiment off the map. This fear of being crushed drove every single thing he did, especially his policies toward two really important countries, China and Germany. Let's take China in the mid-1920s. It was a total mess, and Stalin had a choice to make. The ideological path was obvious, support Mao's Chinese Communist Party. But the pragmatic path? Well, that pointed in a completely different direction. He needed a stable China on that massive eastern border of his, so he could focus on turning the USSR into an industrial powerhouse. So what did he do? He backed the other guys, the nationalists, the GMD. So how on earth did he justify this move? Well, pretty cleverly, actually. He used this mix of ideology and pure strategy. He claimed the Chinese communists weren't real Marxists because they were focused on peasants, not the industrial workers. But let's be real, the true reason was his desperate need for stability to get his industrial great turn done. It was pure power politics, just, wearing an ideological costume. And this just shows the brutal real-world cost of that choice. In 1927, the very same nationalist GMD that Stalin was supporting suddenly turned on their communist allies. They slaughtered 30,000 striking workers in Shanghai. I mean, for the guy who's supposed to be the leader of the world's working class, backing their killers, that's a mind-blowing compromise. And it wasn't just in China. Look at Germany, the one country Marx himself thought was perfectly right for a workers' revolution. What does Stalin do? The exact same thing. Instead of trying to start a rebellion, he signs the Treaty of Berlin. This deal basically guaranteed peace and trade, giving him that breathing space he so desperately needed to build up his industry. Once again, stability crushed revolution. Okay, let's fast forward to the 1930s. As the shadow of fascism starts to creep across Europe, Stalin's pragmatic, survival-first policy gets pushed to its absolute breaking point. It forces him into a series of wild, desperate, and totally contradictory gambles. Historians call this his zigzag diplomacy. And you can totally see why. I mean, first he's ordering communists everywhere to attack moderate social democrats, calling them the main enemy. Then, once Hitler's in power, he does a complete 180, pushing for popular fronts and trying to make alliances with those same Western powers. And when that doesn't work, well, he makes the most shocking pivot of all. So, the big question is, why was his policy swinging around so wildly? It really comes down to one thing. He felt completely and utterly isolated. He poured resources into supporting the anti-fascist cause in the Spanish Civil War, hoping it would convince Britain and France to join him in an alliance. But they were all in on appeasement, and frankly, they were terrified of communism. So Stalin was left all alone, staring down a rapidly growing Germany. I mean, just imagine being in that position. It's terrifying. You failed to build a coalition to protect yourself. Your biggest enemy is getting stronger every single day. What do? What's the last desperate move you can possibly make to save the country you've poured everything into building? He made a deal with the devil. Seriously, the Nazi-Soviet pact was the ultimate act of cold, calculated realpolitik. From an ideological standpoint, it was absolutely unthinkable. But just look at what he got out of it, from his perspective. 2 precious years to rearm for the war he knew was coming, plus a huge territorial buffer in Eastern Europe. At that moment, for Stalin, survival was the only ideology that mattered. And that war, when it finally did come, was more horrific than even he could have possibly imagined. The trauma of World War II would reforge his entire foreign policy into one single unbending obsession: security. You have to try and wrap your head around this. After losing over 20 million citizens, after seeing his country burned to the ground, Stalin's one and only foreign policy goal was now absolute total security. The mission was no longer just to survive, but to build a permanent, impenetrable shield against any future attack from the West. And this slide shows you exactly how he built that shield. It was methodical. He went country by country, installing loyal pro-Soviet governments all across Eastern Europe. And yeah, sure, they were communist, but their main purpose was strategic. This was a defensive glacis, an iron buffer zone to protect the Soviet heartland. And Poland, that historic invasion route into Russia, was the absolute cornerstone of the whole thing. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you need one single piece of evidence to show what really mattered to Stalin, look no further than Yugoslavia. Tito was a die-hard communist. Ideologically, they should have been best friends. But, and this is the key, Tito refused to take orders from Moscow. And for Stalin, that was unforgivable. It was never, ever about shared beliefs. It was about absolute, total control. And even when he saw a chance to expand communist influence, like in Korea, look how unbelievably cautious he was. He gave Kim Il-sung the green light to invade, but only when he thought the risks were low. And he made absolutely sure to avoid any direct fight with the United States. He let his allies, China and North Korea, do all the heavy lifting and take all the risks. This is not some reckless revolutionary we're talking about. This is a calculating chess master managing risk. So when you put it all together, you look at his policies from the 20s, through the 30s, and into the Cold War, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. And it leads us to a pretty powerful conclusion about what was really going on between his beliefs and his actions. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Communism was never the ultimate goal. It was the tool. It was the language he used to justify his actions, the system he used to demand absolute loyalty, and the lens he used to view his enemies. But the engine driving everything deep down was always pragmatism. So let's go back to that first question. Was he a revolutionary or a realist? The evidence seems pretty clear. Maybe the question itself is the problem. He wasn't one or the other. He was a ruthless realist who discovered that the language and ideals of revolution were the most powerful weapons he could possibly wield to protect the interests of the Soviet state. And at the end of the day, that was all that ever truly mattered.